This is what the narcissist never expected you to do. Walk away, heal and rebuild without them. And that's exactly what they'll regret for the rest of their lives. Narcissists think they've got you trapped. They expect you to stay confused, apologizing, second-guessing yourself. They feed off your loyalty, your patience, and your silence. They assume you'll keep showing up, even when they're the ones tearing you down. That's the game. They take, you give, and they never imagine the cycle ending. But here's what they didn't see coming. You waking up. You learning what narcissism is, you finally seeing the pattern, and most of all, you choosing yourself. When you stop chasing, stop explaining, and start setting boundaries, that's when everything changes. You're no longer their supply. You're no longer under their control. And that loss, it hits them hard. Now, before we go any further, I want you to think back. That relationship, the one that drained you, confused you, maybe even left you questioning who you were. Who was it, and how did it change you? That's where your story starts, and that's where their regret begins. The narcissistic relationship trap. Let's be real. Most people don't realize they're in a toxic relationship until it's too late. You probably didn't either. In the beginning, things seemed fine, maybe even amazing. They told you exactly what you wanted to hear. They made you feel special, important, needed. That's how narcissists operate in the beginning. They charm you. They mirror you. They pretend to be everything you've ever wanted. Let's say you were dating someone named Lisa. At first, Lisa was sweet, attentive, always texting you good morning, planning dates, making you feel like you were the center of her world. You felt lucky. You thought, finally someone who gets me. But slowly, things started changing. One day, you shared some good news, maybe a small work win or something you were proud of. Lisa barely responded. In fact, she changed the subject. A week later, you noticed she rolled her eyes when you were talking. The compliments stopped. The criticism started. Then came the silent treatment. The guilt trips. The late replies. The emotional distance. You kept trying to fix it. You thought maybe she was stressed. Maybe it was something you did. You made excuses for her. You tried harder, gave more, showed up even when it hurt. But nothing worked. And while you were busy trying to save the relationship, Lisa was already pulling away, already texting someone else, already making you the bad guy in her next story. That's what narcissists do. You see, narcissists don't build relationships, they build supply chains. You were never the partner. You were the resource, the emotional fuel. And when you were drained dry, they moved on to the next person, leaving you confused, hurt, and wondering what the hell just happened. It's the same pattern every time. You start off feeling like you matter. Then slowly, you feel like you're walking on eggshells. And eventually, you feel invisible. And the worst part, you blame yourself. You think, maybe if I was more patient. That's how they keep control. You think, maybe. So here's the truth. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't too emotional. You weren't too demanding. You were in a relationship with someone who never planned to love you. They planned to use you. And that's a hard truth. But it's the first step to breaking free. The narcissist mindset. Now, let's talk about how narcissists actually think. Because this is where everything starts to make sense. You see, narcissists live in survival mode. Deep down, they don't believe in love, trust, or emotional connection. They believe in control, power, image. That's what drives them. Let me give you a real-life example. Imagine a guy named Dave. To everyone else, Dave seems confident. He's successful at work, dresses sharp, tells great stories. But behind closed doors, Dave is different. When his girlfriend brings up something that bothers her, he flips it around. Suddenly, she's the problem. If she asks for emotional support, he calls her too needy. If she pulls away, he panics. But instead of getting honest, he guilt trips her, plays the victim, or finds someone else to give him attention. Why? Because Dave can't handle real vulnerability. He sees relationships as transactions. He gives just enough to keep people hooked, but never enough to truly connect. And the moment he feels exposed or unimportant, he lashes out or disappears. That's the narcissist mindset in a nutshell. They don't reflect on their actions. They don't say, maybe I went too far. Instead, they double down. To them, admitting fault is weakness. Taking responsibility, that's not in their vocabulary. They'd rather lie, deflect, or blame you. And here's the kicker, they know they're doing it. They know when they're lying. They know when they're manipulating you. They know when they're using guilt, silence, or charm to control you. But they don't stop, because it works. And because they believe they're entitled to whatever they want. Now you might be wondering, do they ever feel bad? Do they ever regret what they've done? The short answer, not in the way you or I would. They might regret losing their grip on you. They might regret losing their source of attention. But real remorse, the kind that leads to change, that's rare. Because true regret requires self-awareness. And narcissists avoid that at all costs. So when you finally saw through them, when you stopped reacting, stopped explaining, and started pulling away, that's when their panic set in. Because the truth, they never expected you to figure them out. The moment you woke up, there was a moment, maybe small, maybe sudden, when something inside you said, this isn't love. Maybe you were lying in bed staring at your phone, waiting for a reply that never came. Maybe you were walking on eggshells for the 100th time, exhausted from the emotional back and forth. Or maybe you typed something like, why does my partner ignore me, into Google, hoping for answers, and you found them. That was the moment everything started to shift. You began reading, watching videos, learning about narcissism, manipulation, and trauma bonding. And suddenly you weren't in the dark anymore. You saw the patterns, the gaslighting, the silent treatments, the constant need for control. You realized you weren't overreacting. You weren't being too sensitive. You were being conditioned. And that realization? That's what narcissists fear the most. Because the second you understand what they are, they lose their grip. They counted on you never figuring it out. They assumed you'd keep blaming yourself, keep trying harder, keep sacrificing your peace just to keep the relationship alive. But you didn't. You woke up. You started asking better questions. You started trusting your gut. You stopped chasing validation from someone who never planned to give it. You stopped defending yourself to someone who never wanted to understand. And that's when things changed. You stopped reacting. You stopped explaining. You stopped showing up just to be torn down again. You didn't even have to scream or fight. You just let go. And that silence, that indifference, that's what hit them hardest. Because narcissists don't panic when you cry or beg. They panic when you go quiet. When you stop playing the game. When you finally realize they were never offering love. They were offering control. That moment, your awakening, is the beginning of your freedom and the beginning of their regret. The narcissist's game plan. They didn't just stumble into your life. They chose you. From the very beginning, the narcissist was studying you. When you thought they were just getting to know you, they were actually assessing you, testing your empathy, checking your boundaries, and watching how you reacted to small comments or challenges. They were gathering data, figuring out exactly what version of themselves to show you to get what they wanted. At first it felt like a strong connection. The attention was intense, the conversations deep, the affection constant. That wasn't love, that was strategy. If you were kind, successful, loyal, or driven, they saw all of that as fuel. You had qualities they lacked, but desperately wanted to control. To them, your stability, your reputation, your emotional strength, those weren't things to admire. They were things to use. They learned what you cared about, what made you feel seen, and what made you feel small. And over time, they flipped the script. The compliments turned into passive-aggressive digs. The closeness turned into control. They kept you off balance on purpose, giving you just enough love to keep you hoping and just enough pain to keep you chasing. This is how narcissists operate. They create a cycle: love bomb, devalue, control, discard, over and over. And they expected you to stay trapped in it. They thought you'd always come back. They thought you'd always make excuses for them. They assumed you'd never figure it out, but they were wrong. You started to see it. You began connecting the dots. You realized this wasn't love. It was manipulation. And instead of shrinking to fit their world, you started standing up. You pulled back. You stopped explaining yourself. You started protecting your peace. And that, right there, is what shattered their plan. Because everything they built was based on one thing: your silence, your confusion, your loyalty to someone who didn't deserve it. But you chose clarity. You chose boundaries. You chose yourself. And now the person who once thought they had you wrapped around their finger is left watching from a distance, realizing they lost the one thing they thought they owned. Not because you left, but because you woke up and never looked back. Trauma bonding and emotional control. If you ever wondered, why was it so hard to walk away? This is why. You weren't just in a relationship. You were in a trauma bond. A trauma bond is what happens when pain and affection are mixed together over time. One moment, you're being blamed, ignored, or belittled. The next, they're suddenly kind again. They apologize. They act sweet. They tell you they love you. And just like that, you're pulled right back in. That cycle keeps you emotionally hooked. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is trying to make sense of the chaos. You start chasing the good moments, trying to get back to the person they were in the beginning. But that person, that version of them, it was an act. A mask. Let's say your partner would lash out at you in the morning, ignore your texts all day, then send a cute message at 10 p.m. like nothing happened. You'd feel relief, like, okay, things are back to normal. But the truth is, that was never normal. That was manipulation. And your nervous system was on a roller coaster the entire time. That's what trauma bonding feels like. Confusing, unpredictable, and exhausting. You might have started doubting your own instincts. You might have said things like, "They're not all bad. I just need to be more patient." But that wasn't love talking. That was survival. That was your brain trying to find stability in an unstable relationship. And the narcissist? They knew exactly what they were doing. They kept you off balance on purpose. They knew when to pull you in, when to push you away, when to go silent, and when to throw out just enough affection to keep you hanging on. It wasn't random. It was control. The worst part? They made you think you were the problem. You apologized when you did nothing wrong. You over-explained, overcompensated, and walked on eggshells just to keep the peace. And slowly, you started disappearing. Emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically. But here's the truth. That wasn't your fault. That was a trained reaction to constant emotional manipulation. And now that you understand that, you can finally break the cycle. Because once you see the pattern, you can stop blaming yourself. You can start reclaiming your voice. You can begin to heal. The trauma bond loses its grip the moment you realize you were never the one who needed fixing. Devaluation and objectification. At some point things shifted, and you felt it. Maybe it was subtle at first. Fewer compliments, less eye contact. They stopped asking about your day. The energy changed. You went from being valued to being tolerated, from special to useful, from a partner to an object. This stage is called devaluation, and it happens to almost everyone who gets close to a narcissist. See, once they've locked you in emotionally, they stop pretending. The admiration they once showed turns into irritation. Your strengths become targets. Your needs become too much. They start making you feel like a burden, like you're always doing something wrong. You might have found yourself saying things like, "Why am I always apologizing?" Or, Why do I feel like I'm annoying them just by existing? That's not normal. That's emotional abuse. The narcissist begins to objectify you. You're no longer seen as a person with feelings, thoughts, and boundaries. You're a possession, a tool, something to control, not connect with. Let's say you started asking for more respect. Suddenly you were called dramatic or too sensitive. If you pulled away, they'd punish you with silence or coldness. If you got emotional, they'd mock you. Or worse, act like you were the narcissist. They needed you just quiet, compliant, and endlessly available. This is when they stop hiding their true self. The mask slips completely. They disappear for hours or days without explanation. They flirt openly with others. They stop putting in effort. And when you bring it up, they brush you off or act like you're crazy for even asking. This stage hurts deeply because you remember how it started. You remember the version of them that cared, listened, and showed up. But here's the truth. That version wasn't real. The real version is the one who objectified you, who made you feel invisible, who treated you like a convenience, not a companion. And if you're sitting there thinking, I felt like a shell of myself, you're not alone. That's exactly how the narcissist wants you to feel. Emptied out, unsure of yourself, easy to control. But here's the good news. This is often the moment people wake up. When the pain gets so loud, the silence from them becomes unbearable, and the illusion finally breaks. Because once you see how they treated you, not as a person but as a product, you can begin to step back and say, I deserve better than this. And you do. The power they didn't see coming. Here's what they never saw coming. You getting back up. Narcissists assume once they've broken you down, you'll stay that way. They think the damage is permanent, that you'll stay stuck, chasing their approval, forever questioning your worth. But you didn't stay broken. You started waking up. You began to understand what had really happened to you. You looked into narcissism, trauma bonds, emotional abuse. You found the words you didn't have before, and slowly the confusion started to clear. That's when the shift began. You stopped reacting. You stopped justifying. You stopped defending yourself to someone who never cared about truth in the first place. You pulled your energy back, and trust me, that shook them. Narcissists rely on control. They feed off your emotional responses. They need your attention, even if it's negative. But when you go silent, when you stop explaining yourself, when you set boundaries and mean it, that's when they panic, because that's not what they planned for. They never expected you to detach. They never expected you to educate yourself. They never thought you'd recognize their patterns and walk away with your head high. They thought you needed them, that you were too weak, too broken, too financially or emotionally dependent to move on. But you did. And that power, the quiet, steady kind of power, that's what they regret the most. Not because they loved you, but because they lost control over someone they thought they owned. And now, while they keep repeating the same toxic cycles with someone else, you're breaking free. You're healing. You're learning how to trust yourself again. That's the power they didn't see coming. And it's the one they'll never forget. Why they can't give closure. One of the hardest parts about leaving a narcissist is the emptiness they leave behind. Not because you miss the chaos, but because there's no closure, no apology, no accountability, no explanation, just silence, or worse, blame. You keep wondering, why couldn't they just own what they did? Why can't they admit they hurt me? The truth? They can't, because narcissists don't do accountability, they do avoidance, deflection, denial, anything but the truth. You see, closure requires self-reflection. It requires a person to say, I was wrong, I caused pain, I take responsibility. But for a narcissist, that level of honesty feels like death to their ego. They've spent their whole lives avoiding the idea that they might be the problem. If they admit they were wrong, their entire false self crumbles. So instead, they rewrite the story. In their version, you were unstable, You overreacted. You were never satisfied. And if you try to talk to them about it, they'll dodge, gaslight, or throw your words back at you, not to bring closure, but to regain control. This is why so many people stay stuck, waiting for an apology that will never come, waiting for the person who hurt them to suddenly develop empathy. But narcissists don't grow like that. They don't learn from mistakes, they run from them. So if you've been sitting in that pain, hoping they'll show up one day and say, "You didn't deserve what I did to you," I want you to hear this clearly. That's not your healing to wait for. The closure you're looking for, it's in the truth. It's in finally seeing them clearly. It's in accepting that the apology may never come, because they're not capable of giving it. And when you stop expecting them to fix the wound they created, something powerful happens. You start healing anyway. Your survival is their regret. They didn't expect you to survive. Not really. They thought when they left you'd collapse, that without their approval, attention, or validation, you'd fall apart. That you'd stay stuck, confused, broken, waiting for them to come back and fix what they destroyed. But you didn't. You might have struggled. Maybe you went through hell, emotionally, mentally, financially. Maybe you lost friends, family, your sense of identity. You might have hit rock bottom, but you didn't stay there. And that's what they regret the most. Not the pain they caused, because they don't think like that, but the fact that you got up. You started rebuilding piece by piece. You learned about what happened to you. You began healing, growing, becoming someone they no longer recognize and definitely can't control. That strength you found, it threatens everything about them, because narcissists need to feel superior. They need to believe they're the best you'll ever have, that no one else will want you, that you can't function without them. So when you survive without them, when you thrive, that fantasy falls apart. Let's say you were left during a hard time, maybe during a health scare, or when you were out of work, or right after a family crisis. They thought that was the final blow, that you'd sink. But you didn't. You kept going. You showed them that the very thing they used to break you became your fuel to rise. And now they're left watching from the sidelines, stuck in the same cycles, still chasing attention from new people, still blaming everyone else for their mess. Meanwhile, you're healing, you're rebuilding, you're awake. And whether they admit it or not, they know it, they feel it, and deep down, they regret ever losing control over someone as strong as you. The power of no. There's one word that narcissists hate more than anything else. No. Not because it's aggressive, not because it's disrespectful, but because it means they're not in control anymore. For most of your relationship, no probably wasn't an option. You said yes to things you didn't want to do. You stayed quiet when you should have spoken up. You gave more than you had because you were afraid of conflict, or worse, afraid of abandonment. That wasn't weakness, that was survival. But now, you're not surviving, you're rebuilding. And with that comes one of the most powerful tools you'll ever carry: the ability to say no, and mean it. No, I won't tolerate emotional abuse. No, I won't explain myself to someone who's not listening. No, I'm not going back. No, you don't get access to me anymore. Every time you say no, you're drawing a line. You're reclaiming space that used to belong to them. And trust me, they feel it, because narcissists don't know how to handle boundaries. They push, test, provoke. But when you hold firm, when you stop reacting, stop feeding the drama, and simply disengage, they lose their grip. It might trigger their rage. It might bring out guilt trips, fake apologies, or last-ditch love bombs. But stay calm, stay grounded, because that reaction isn't love. It's control slipping away. And here's the truth they never wanted you to know. Your no is stronger than their ego. It's not about being cold or bitter. It's about choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, respect over crumbs. Saying no isn't just rejecting them, it's choosing you. And every time you do, you're reminding yourself and them that you're no longer available. for manipulation. You're no longer a target. You're free. You'll never get real closure from a narcissist. And Stoicism teaches us something simple but life-changing. You don't need it. You can't control what they did. You can't rewrite the past. But what you can control is what happens next. And that's where your strength begins. Your power isn't in chasing apologies or proving your worth. It's in choosing peace. It's in setting boundaries. It's in walking away without guilt and not looking back. Healing isn't about fixing them. It's about becoming someone they can't touch. Someone who doesn't explain, doesn't shrink, and doesn't get pulled back into the chaos. You didn't just survive what they did. You came back stronger, smarter, unshakable. They didn't expect that. But here you are. You didn't just leave the narcissist. You came home to yourself.